Hi everyone, welcome back to another exciting episode of Destination Truth. I'm your host Tyler, and today we have an exciting episode with Adam Kokesh, who's running for president, but he doesn't like being called that, and you can see what he'd rather prefer being called in both his interview and the speech that I have both in this video right here. So if you'd like to see his interview, please fast forward to the second half, and otherwise just keep watching to see his speech beforehand. They was both filmed at Freedom Fest 2018, which is a blast. And next year I'm gonna go again for sure, and I'd like to invite my fellow libertarians and anyone of any age, but preferably I want to get more young people, guys, because the median age at the conference was let's just say old, and this philosophy is growing right now. Libertarianism is growing, and although ideologies within libertarian can have differences, they're all very largely compatible. For example, Adam, I think, is much more of an anarchist, and I am a minarchist. I am very open about this, but the thing is, they actually work together quite well, because minarchy is a small government, anarchy is no government. So once we get to the new world without a giant one world government, we can talk about this, and we can make our own small governments. We even within anarchy, you could even set up your own small communist conclave if you want. And I mean, it would be small, and that way it wouldn't be a giant government that people disagree with. If a small number of people in a small town wanted to do that, they can, which is the beautiful part of anarchy. So that's my caveat, being that within libertarianism, guys, we can disagree all we want, but at the end of the day, we are all very compatible. We all believe in the same thing, non-initiation of force, and many other very compatible ideologies. So let's get along, guys, and let's get straight into this interview. I hope you guys enjoy it, and if you do, please give me a like and subscribe. And without any further ado, let's get straight into the show.
Kokesh. Thank you so much, Gary, and thank you everybody for being here. I know it's a bit of a small room, and I'd rather be talking to you directly than with this electronic interference, but please bear with me as we're doing this for the sake of the Freedom Fest recording. And I'm really grateful that you all are here this afternoon, because you're at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas. There are 5 other amazing sessions happening right now. So you guys know this is the Adam Kokesh one. If you want, there's like a blockchain one with women in the next room, and then there's one like you're going to be able to get rich in 5 minutes if you go to the one in the next room. So everybody's in the right room, yeah? Okay, just checking. Thank you. So you're also in Vegas. You know, how many other things could you be doing way more entertaining than listening to me on a Saturday afternoon in Las Vegas? So I really do appreciate putting the time into this, and I'm not going to try to give some grandiose rally speech and get you all excited and on your feet, because I know you people are here because you already care about this. So my role in motivating and inspiring isn't really relevant to this audience, and out of respect for you and the intellect that you bring to this conversation in this room right here, I want to leave as much time as possible for questions and answers. And this is my 3rd Freedom Fest, but it's the first one I've really gotten to enjoy and appreciate the kind of people who come out here and the unique intellectual tradition of this particular event. And I think Mark Skousen said it very well in the closing panel earlier. He said it's not about who's right, it's about what's right. And I think in my activism, I've always felt, and I think a lot of libertarians have this curse of being a little bit ahead of our time. You know, it's like that scene from Back to the Future, you know, when Marty McFly goes and riffs on the guitar and goes, oh, well, don't worry, your kids are going to love this. And I feel like oftentimes when we're in that frustration, and it feels like that's very much true about my campaign. So I want to go through a couple of brief points, and I made myself some notes so that I could get through what I feel like I need to cover before we get to questions and really have a conversation about this. Is this the right thing? Is this strategy that I'm outlining the right way to move humanity forward, to achieve the voluntary society that so many of us envision? So let's tell you first a little bit about why I'm doing this, just enough about who I am, which really should be the least important thing to at least understand that, how this campaign got started, and what I think you need to know that I've got is unique insights from my time as an activist. I've been a full-time activist in one form or another for 11 years now, that make it obvious to me that this is the only way forward. And then a little bit about how this campaign is going to work and some of the mechanics about dissolving the federal government. So first, why? I come from a very ideology-driven perspective. If you want to put that in conventional terms, being a libertarian, what does that mean? Someone who believes in freedom and doesn't follow it up with the word "but" at the end of the sentence, right? I believe in freedom, but I'm willing to use the violence of government to do this or to do that. Well, for me, it's a matter of ethics and ideology to say no. Politics is the conversation of who do we point the guns of government at to organize society. And when you take an ethical approach, the answer to that question is nobody. And when you start with that premise, you can look at the real world and say, I'm not fighting for some vague ideal, I'm fighting for a very specific objective. As the Libertarian Party says in its charter, nothing less than a world set free in our lifetimes. I see that that's achievable. I see that that's possible. I see the way that humanity is developing and evolving and accelerating in our experience in every way possible. That some fundamental change at this level really has to be inevitable. I see what humanity is going through right now, this incredible turning point in human history, driven by the internet, driven by technology, and I know that we are going to be coming out within our lifetimes, the other side of this destructive, violent paradigm of statism. And I don't want to be telling my grandkids, well, I watched that happen on television. I was there for that. Yeah, I read about that in the paper. That was cool. Yeah, I remember when we got the internet. Wasn't that cool? And then we used it to get rid of all the great institutional injustice in the world. I want to be able to tell my grandkids that when I had that opportunity, I did absolutely everything I could in my power to make that happen so that you could grow up on the other side of statism. That's what motivates me. That's what I wake up thinking every morning that gets me going in this mission. So how I got to this point, as Gary mentioned, I was in the Marine Corps, if you couldn't tell from the crayons in my teeth. Those jokes never get old. Anybody here? Anybody here prior military? I'm so sorry to hear that. Thank you for your servitude. Thank you for being open-minded now in light of what you've learned since then. But I'm actually surprised that we only had 3 hands for that in this room, because especially in people who generally support me and in the libertarian movement and in the party in general, we have way more than our share of veterans and people who have been violent enforcers. I think we even have, we're starting to, now that we're able to talk about law enforcement from a little more enlightened, loving perspective, I think we also are starting to have more than our share of law enforcement in the movement, because those of us who have been that violent hand of government are often so repelled by that experience to the opposite, that we want to do everything possible to minimize the violent injustice of government. So I was in the Marines. I volunteered to go to Iraq in 2004. I was a libertarian in name only at the time. And this is why I'm so passionate about people understanding libertarianism not as a political party set of positions, but as a philosophy, as a moral message, as something that is fundamentally grounded in love and respect for our common humanity. Because when I found out about the Libertarian Party, it was when I was in high school. And at some point, some teacher was like asking the class, all right, so you guys, do you want to be a Republican or a Democrat? And I was like, I was the punk kid who got, arrested at school for blowing up the boys' bathroom. So, of course, I'm sitting in the back going, wait, Republican or Democrat? You mean I don't have a choice? I have to be totally freaking lame? This is America. Come on, there's got to be another option. He said, well, yeah, there's these crazy libertarians over there. They like to be left alone. And I was like, yeah, all right, leave me alone. Sign me up for that. And the first version of the libertarian message I got was fiscally liberal, socially awkward. I'm sorry. It's really easy to mix those up when it rolls off the tongue better than the other. Socially liberal, fiscally conservative, right? And that doesn't really come close to getting at that core message. And it took me 10 years. And I think this is also really important for us as activists, understanding how people wake up. And I like to think I have some credibility talking on this issue, because I've done, depending on how you want to count them, 4 to 6 national tours where in at least 4 of them have been in over 40 states. So when I go out and I talk to people, I talk to a lot of people on the street. You see the Freedom logo on our vehicle, and they come up and ask what it's about. But I also talk to libertarians. I say, how did you wake up? And I've never heard anyone say, well, there was this guy in a bar yelling at me, and he turned up the volume just enough. He was yelling at me just loud enough. I was able to recognize that he was right about everything. And that's how I became a libertarian. Never heard anyone say that. I've never heard anyone say, well, my friend on Facebook, he just came up with the most clever meme possible. And I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. Taxation is theft. That's it. That did it for me. I guess I'm a libertarian now. No, by examining this and the luxury that I've had of talking to so many people has led to, I'd like to think I have one of the best anecdotal bodies of data, at least, of evidence of how it is that people wake up. And it happens in quiet contemplation. It happens in that time when you're able to step back and go, you know what, I think that person is right, but I have to consider it against my worldview. I have to weigh it against what I know and what I believe. And it's very important that we keep this in mind because it's very humbling. But I'll come back to why that's important in terms of this presidential campaign and how we get to move humanity forward when I come back to that. But when I got out, I joined Iraq Veterans Against the War. I wanted to have my experience in combat to be able to be used for something good, to wake people up, to enlighten people at least about the nature of the occupation of Iraq. And then I realized that it wasn't enough, and this is what really drove my awakening. It wasn't enough to be against a war, or even against war in concept, but that at the heart of that is militarism. And behind that is statism, the philosophy that it's okay to use violence if it's organized enough, if it has enough social consent, that somehow that makes it just, right? So I was, I couldn't shut up when my race was over, running for Congress in New Mexico in 2010. And so I got a radio show. That was the start of Adam versus the Man, which got picked up as a TV show by the Russians, Russia Today, RT America, when they're trying to make themselves look a little less Russian, right? We're just RT America. And I got canceled after 4 months for political reasons. I was as critical of Putin as I thought was appropriate, and I guess that was more than my Russian sponsors felt was appropriate. So went independent, focused online, and focused on my YouTube channel, got it up to 70 million views. And so it was during that time I was working on my podcast soon after having my TV show canceled. I was at the Bilderberg rally, or protest rather, organized by Alex Jones and InfoWars in Northern Virginia. And it was there that I was debating Jason Burmis, who's the original info warrior. And we were debating freedom versus statism. And he said, at some point in the conversation, yeah, oh yeah, well, what would you do if you were president? And I was like, really? What would I do if I was president? Quit, go home, get a real job? Well, let's see, I would only get rid of three things, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. Yeah, and I think that would be a good start in moving humanity towards a state of greater freedom. And he's challenging, no, really, what would you do, Adam? Really, what would you do if you were president? I said, well, I don't want to be president. I don't want to be in charge of people through violence. I don't want to exercise this illegitimate authority. In fact, I would go so far as to say, you really have to be some kind of psychopath to say, I want to be president of the United States. I want to be in charge of this giant violent monopoly. I want to force my will on the entire country. It's an absurd proposition. It's a position that shouldn't exist. It's so unnatural. So I felt like I still had to answer these questions. If I'm going to be justifying this worldview, I still have to be able to answer all the hard questions. What would you do about this? What would you do about that? And I found that none of them were very hard. What would you do about this agency? What would you do about that agency? Is there a single element of the federal government that we couldn't either get rid of or do better at the state level? And we really couldn't come up with anything that answered that question. I was like, no, we really have to wait. We really have to keep the federal government going for a while. We really have to, maintain this, and There was nothing that justified that. And as I developed in my activism over the years, and I went to jail for civil disobedience. I was in Washington, D.C.'s lockup for 4 months, 2 months in solitary. I like to refer to it as my government-induced, taxpayer-funded spiritual retreat. I got to catch up on a lot of good reading, do a lot of yoga, wrote a lot of letters, had a lot of fun correspondence in there. But it was while I was in jail, people sent me all the great libertarian manifestos. I used to be able to rattle off like 20 names, starting with Rothbard, Mises, Hayek, Ruhr, Paul Sr., Spooner. I'm Smith. I could keep going. I'm going to miss so many. I don't even want to try. But with all of this great knowledge and this understanding of how people wake up, I decided that I would become the very best rip-off artist the freedom movement has ever known. And I would take all the best ideas and all the best features of these books, all these things that have converted and woken up so many people, and I would create the one ultimate conversion tool. Elijah, if you would bring up a copy for me, I should have my prop up here handy. We have copies of this for everybody here. And one of the things that I'm working on with this right now, it's just 100 pages. It's a free audiobook. It's free in every digital format possible. We give them away everywhere we go at events. I love telling people, or asking people, how much do you think it cost me to print this book? Anybody want to guess? Now it's kind of a trick question. I've already set up the answer, right? But how much do you guys think it costs to print a book like this?
$5.
$5. That's a great, terrible answer. Thank you for feeding into my trick question, sir. $1.25. Getting closer.
China or the U.S.?
What's that?
China or the U.S.?
China. It's printed in China. Yeah. Global market right there. Yeah. No, I'm self-published. So this is one of the huge advantages. No, the answer to this, 40 cents each.
Wow.
I got my last print run was 30,000 copies. I got it for $12,000, and that's delivered to a warehouse in Long Beach. I was able to go pick them up and take them to my warehouse in Arizona. So giving these away, 40 cents each, as a tool to wake people up, you think, why aren't we getting behind this more? Why aren't we using this or exploring things like this? Now, there's one thing that I'm really excited about that this book makes possible. Aside from the fact that it's already been very successful, it's in its 5th printing now, and over 3 million downloads. We are working on something that's been a fantasy of mine since I came up with this idea a few years ago. And it's what's made possible why it's being so inexpensive. At the next scale of printing, I can get this book for 27 cents each. The people of New Orleans are already, especially with their experiences of the last couple decades, very distrustful of government, so it's a very ripe audience. We're going to be delivering 205,000 copies of this book for just $120,000 total. So if anybody's interested in that or wants to help out with any of those projects, once we hit New Orleans, it's just a matter of time. Now, I have to say, before essentially we can cover the whole world this way if we have to. Now, I have to go back to that idea of how people wake up, right? And what it means to wake up. And by the way, I hate that analogy. We use that term waking up. How did you wake up to the nature of government? How did you wake up to freedom? How did you, wake up to libertarianism? And it's not really accurate as an analogy because you don't go back to sleep. You don't unlearn what you have learned. You cannot unsee what you have seen. But to acknowledge that most of us make a false assumption when we think that we have to wake up everybody is very important. Right? A lot of us, we're idealists. We wouldn't be here if we weren't idealists. And we know that the message of freedom speaks to every single human being on this planet. That everybody can get this. That this is inherent to having an independent will in your own body. That you own yourself. That you want that will respected in the world. And yet, you're not going to wake everybody up. There's a lot of walls out there you can go bang your head against trying to wake people up for people who simply don't care, who never will. And this is a really tough thing to accept for a lot of us. And a lot of us as actors, and I made this mistake for a long time going into media production, like we're going to wake people up, we're going to convert people. The thing is, right now, it depends how you want to count it and how you want to define libertarian, but we're about 1% to 2% of the population, right? There's not a lot of us. But we do have to grow, and I think there is the potential for us to go from about 2% to about 10%. And I think that's enough. And at that point, we have to be able to take our principles and create practical policy proposals from them that unite people and immediately can bring the things that this message can promise to bear to make people's lives better. So I like to put my audiences on the spot sometimes, so I'll ask you guys, how many of you designed the cut of the shirt that you're wearing right now? Yeah, nobody, right? It's another great trick question. Although normally at libertarian events, there's one smartass in the back going, well, I'm a fashion designer actually in my spare time, that's my day job, and but nobody here, right? Well, if I was given a lecture on fashion and design, I could look down my nose at y'all and say, what a bunch of sheeple. What a bunch of followers. And you guys see how that's relevant to our movement, right? And the attitude that a lot of us take on sometimes thinking, hey, well, why can't people care more? Why don't people come out and vote? Why don't they come to our events? Why don't people get more active? And we have to just accept that that's a reality of human nature, but that it's actually in line with our beliefs for them to engage in a kind of rational ignorance, for there to be specialization of labor in leadership as well. And if we are really reluctant to want to tell other people what to do, right? It's against our nature. We want to respect other people's freedom, but at the same time, we have to take leadership and say, look, you guys want a better life? You don't have to read a bunch of books that, you don't have to get into all of this, academia that's going to bore the hell out of you. But hey, based on my principles, I've got a practical policy proposal that's going to immediately improve your life. Come with us. We've got it figured out. You can go back to watching Dancing with the Stars and whatever it is you were doing, enjoying your life. And in a way, the people who have taken that attitude are probably a lot more libertarian than those of us who call ourselves libertarian activists, but are slaves to our reaction to the state. And I think we have to acknowledge that too, that we change our own headspace and respect that there are better things to do in life than fighting the state, that the point of fighting the state is not to fight the state, it's to live a better life on the other side of victory in fighting the state. So how do we take leadership? How do we give people that practical policy? So before I get into what I'm proposing in localization, like I said, there are a couple things in background information that I think are really important to my understanding of this and where we're going that a lot of libertarians seem to miss. And one of them is the impact of technology on social development and how this human experience is accelerating exponentially, driven by Moore's law, right? You all know Moore's law, that computing power doubles on average every 18 months. And regardless of, you want to debate the specifics of Moore's law, it really doesn't matter. The clear course of human history is that technology drives exponential change. Now, you can look at this in terms of the internet already. And so I'm gonna, instead of using decimals, I could say the change of the last 1 year, 10 years, but I want you guys to really think about this. Really consider this against your experience, because I'm going to bring it home to the present, and it's going to make a very powerful point that I want you to feel. Think about the change that we have experienced as a society just over the last 20 years with the internet. I know it's been around longer, but of being active and vibrant and a force in society, 20 years. Think about that. It's revolutionized communication, shopping, transportation, everything that's affected by awareness. I mean, I'm 36, and I like to say I remember before we had the internet, and there are people in this room. I mean, dare I say, I don't mean to judge too many people's age, but who don't remember what the world was like without the internet. Like, I remember, I'm going to use Elijah's story here from last night, but there are those of us who remember, like, when your mom dropped you off somewhere and said, I'm going to pick you up, be standing right here, there's no, I'll text you when I get there. There was a lot of time we used to spend standing around waiting for stuff that you just don't experience anymore. But like even in conversation, right? We don't debate facts anymore. It's right there on the internet. You grab your phone, you figure it out. Imagine now that change. If you can sum that up, how much the world has changed in just the last 20 years. It's about the equivalent of the change that humanity experienced in the 200 years prior to that. Now imagine that for a second. 200 years ago, roughly 1800, we're just rounding here, right? how much life has changed getting up to, from 1800 to the year 2000 versus the last roughly 20 years of the internet. And you go, holy crap, that's really about equivalent to the change that humanity has experienced over the 2,000 years prior to that. That's amazing when you think about that. Now, before I get to the point of this little thought exercise, there's one other important data point that I think a lot of libertarians don't consider adequately. And it's the fact that we are living in the most peaceful times in human history. This isn't my observation. This isn't my wishful thinking. This is Professor Steven Pinker at Harvard, who has proven academically beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are less likely today than ever before in human history to be subject to violence at the hands of another human being. What a beautiful thing to celebrate. Go team people, look how far we've come. Well, this is inherent in the nature of life itself, to seek greater harmony. And none of the things that you see driving these trends are going to be reversed by this technology. If anything, they're just going to be accelerated. And when you understand that freedom is a state of universal nonviolence, you go, yeah, this is really important. Violence is on the decline. So now think back to that scale of change. 20 years, 200 years, 2,000 years. You can even go back and say 20,000, 200,000. For most of the human experience, chronologically speaking, progress was a relatively flat line compared to just the last few hundred years. If that's true, that same amount of change is about to happen in the next 2 years. And then it's going to happen again in the next 2 months. And then again in the next 2 weeks. And then 2 days. And then where will we be? I see this, I describe this in my book as the asymptote. And no, I didn't fail high school geometry. I understand that an asymptote is a line you never hit, right? That an exponential curve goes up and approaches this vertical line and never quite hits it. But the thing is, from our perspective, of our puny little brains, that acceleration of the human experience might as well be a straight vertical line off the charts. We are coming to a different realm of technological enlightenment. So one other background thing that I want to point out in this before we get quickly into the mechanics and then the questions is what I call a cluster of government-ending technologies. The internet, obviously, first and foremost. Artificial intelligence, robotics, self-driving cars, 3D printing organs, Bitcoin, blockchain, rendering the government money system obsolete. But if you look at the effect of all these things, let's just take self-driving cars. And a lot of libertarians, when they hear me talk, they go, self-driving cars? Adam, what's the big deal? Self-driving cars, we've already got it. It's not a big deal. It's going to happen. According to the United States government, 43% of all interactions with law enforcement happen at traffic stops. Well, you can't pull people over when they're not driving their own cars. Sorry, government. That whole part of the racket just goes away. It's obsolete. You can't get people to use the US dollar that is continuously losing value when you have Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency that's continuously gaining value because it's engineered that way. At least you can't when that technology also offers you the ability to do business where government can't see it and you don't have to pay taxes, and then you don't have to pay taxes in US dollars, which really, of course, is the underpinning of the whole fiat currency racket, that they can force you to use that system. How can you convince people that the welfare state is necessary when the average human being can work for 1 year and save up enough money to support their family for the rest of their lives at the same quality of life that we enjoy today? Technology means that the value in terms of real goods that we're producing of 1 hour of human labor just keeps going up and up and up. So in light of all of that, dissolving the federal government seems like a really relatively small step for us to take, right? That it would just be the good first step in the right direction. But ultimately, what I see all of these dynamics, all of these trends coming together to create is a demand for localization, of decentralization of power, of decentralization of government. We see this as a theme in blockchain technology itself, obviously. that it's made it possible to have a monetary system that is truly decentralized. There's no central authority that governs it. Why can't we get to the same point with government? And we can start with a premise that's not philosophy, that's not our ideals. In fact, I would go so far as to say that libertarianism is presented incorrectly when we say libertarianism, therefore government should or should not anything. Because if libertarianism really is about this philosophy of ethics, you can have as much government as you want as long as it's voluntary. Every human being on earth has the right to decide, to choose what government they're going to live under, if any at all. How do we create that reality? Well, we're never going to do it when we buy into the current paradigm of statism's assumption that we all have to be forced into a one-size-fits-nobody but the profiteers, really, kind of solution in government. So how do we localize it? How do we get it taken apart from the top down? And in the United States, having traveled the country now as much as I have, talking to average Americans, I see a winning coalition electorally around this idea. It's very simple to see how it comes together. You look at the turnout for presidential elections in the United States, and what is it? Anybody know? I mean, we all should know about what that participation rate is, right?
Yeah, 25%.
It's about 60%. 60% of Americans are consistently voting in just presidential elections. Now you go to off-cycle elections, right? Congressional, local, city council. Rarely is it over 40. Oftentimes it's down like 15, 20%. So who are we really up against? The people who are, stuck in this paradigm, who have to go out and vote every time they get to their duty. If it's 60% of people who vote consistently in presidential elections, and I would say it's really about 30%, we'll just say roughly, and that's rounding up to be safe here, who consistently vote in every election possible. Those are the, red team go, blue team go, if I don't vote, my country's going to hell, it's my duty. Those are, a relatively small minority. Maybe at most 30% of eligible voters in the United States. So if we can get those 30% who vote only in presidential years and only vote generally reluctantly, we've already got 30 versus 15 and 15 for the old parties. We look at the non-voters, the consistent non-voters of 40%. Maybe half of them can't be made to care. Maybe they're really apathetic and there's nothing you can do about it. That's fine. But at least half of them don't vote because they know it's bullshit. They know that most of the time, it's a waste of their time. But if you give them a reason, you can say, look, hey, come out and vote for this, and it might be the last federal election you ever have to vote in, that gets a lot of people motivated. Now, whenever I'm introduced as a presidential candidate, a little part of me dies inside. Because like I said, you really have to be a psychopath to want to be president of the United States. So while I am technically running for president and running for the Libertarian Party nomination, and of course, the most important thing you can do if you want to support this platform, if you want to support this strategy, is get involved with the Libertarian Party. For those of you who don't know, the Libertarian Party presidential nominees are selected at national conventions. I have never heard a single complaint about the Libertarian Party, including you didn't like the nominees, that couldn't be fixed by the one person complaining showing up and doing something about it. It is, I got to tell you, if you've never been involved with the Libertarian Party before, and I know we have some people here who have been involved for a long time, you can back me up on this if you agree with this, but if you go to a Libertarian Party meeting, there's a real serious danger that if you get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the meeting, you might come back and find out that you've been made an officer. Yeah, some of you had similar experiences where you get voluntold, hey, somebody's got to be the secretary, someone's got to be the state chair. That's how uncompetitive it is to have leadership in the Libertarian Party. And I just spent most of the spring going to as many state conventions as possible. And I'd like to think partly because I announced as early as I did, and I've been doing this organizing and helping pave people's way who couldn't afford it to get to the National Convention. We had over twice as many delegates at the 2018 National Convention as we did at the last time we had a non-presidential one in 2014. That's amazing. The Libertarian Party is not just growing, but the people who care enough about it to get involved is growing too. To be a delegate, all you have to do is go to your state convention and say, I want to be a delegate to the national convention, and they put you on a list. And Elijah here was our national delegate, he's still technically our national delegate coordinator, but especially focused on that through this last national convention. And Elijah, how many states were competitive with their delegate process where like you couldn't just show up and say, I want to be a delegate?
Honestly, like, most of the states were pretty competitive this time around.
I mean at the end, when people could go in and just fill the empty slots.
Oh, you're saying like at the national.
Yeah, how many people, like,
Just about every single state had empty slots at
Yeah.
the national convention.
So-
If you showed up and said, hey, I want to be
Yeah.
in the delegation.
people were showing, we recruited people to show up at the national convention who had just become national party members like the week before, and we're like, hey, well, there's an empty seat with California. Someone, you want to go?
Same day.
Same day? Okay, we are. I was trying to be nice to Elijah here with his episode. No, he was getting people signed up the same day. Come in and you get to vote as if you're voting on the most important stuff for the party. So anyway, I'll just wrap this up real quick in this describing this platform that I'm very confident in saying I'm not running to be president of the United States. I am running for a peaceful, orderly, responsible dissolution of the United States federal government. I will not even put on the ring of power. I will throw it directly into the fire, and that is my commitment on day one. I will sign only whatever documentation is necessary. I like to say one executive order. There might be a separate pardon document to pardon Ross Ulbricht, Ed Snowden, everybody else who's being persecuted by the federal government for victimless crimes. But it's one executive order. Declares the federal government of no authority. It's a bankrupt institution. I resign from the presidency to become custodian. I serve as the bankruptcy agent of the federal government. And I don't want to pretend that I'm even the most qualified person to do this. I'm actually running against someone who's more qualified. How many of you know about Governor Bill Weld? Okay, yeah, some mixed reaction there. And I will say, he's read my book now, and most people don't give him credit, at least not nearly as much as he deserves, for taking the time since 2016 to listen to a lot of libertarians and be much better in his understanding of the message and the philosophy. Whether he's going to cross the line in the sand that I've drawn by 2020 is yet to be seen. But I think he's come a long way. But nothing would make me happier than for him to come out and say, you know what? Yeah, I met Adam. I don't really like him. He's kind of a jerk. And I read his book, and it's okay, but it's kind of boring. But you know what? He is right about one thing. America would be better off with, man, this is a terrible Bill Weld voice. I'm supposed to do this in like a Boston, like, very, calm, sedate, statesman-like voice. This is not Bill Weld's voice. But if he came out and said, but Adam is right about one thing. America would be better off without the federal government. And I've got the better plan to make it happen. I might be tempted to drop out and endorse him and hope that I would be his press secretary. There are better people qualified for this job. But I happen to be in a position where I see the need for this to happen. I see the need for this to get out as a message, as an understanding, and that for the first time in American history, the American people will have a real choice in their presidential election. Because you're not voting for a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian. It's a statist schmuck with an R next to his name, a statist schmuck with a D next to his name, or this exact plan. Because you're not ever going to get President Kokesh. It's not going to happen. I will not accept the job. I will not take that power. I will not put on the ring. So while it's true that technically I'm running for President of the United States, it's much more accurate to say that I'm running to turn the presidential election into a referendum on whether or not the federal government should be allowed to exist at all. So with that, thank you very much for your time and attention today, and we have until they kick us out of the room for questions.
Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting episode of Destination Truth. Today we're here with Adam Kokesh. Am I pronouncing that right? Okay.
Close enough.
Close enough. All right.
There's several acceptable pronunciations of my last name, and as long as you don't say Kokesh, I'm okay with it.
All right, Adam Kokesh, running for president.
Well, you know the story. You know the story.
I just heard it.
Every time someone introduces me as a presidential candidate, little piece of me dies inside, because you have to be some kind of psychopath to say, I want to be president of the United States. I mean, it's literally insane. And I'm not using the word literally figuratively. It's literally insane to say, I want to be president of the United States. Like, I want to yield that power. So while technically I am running for president of the United States, my campaign is to turn the presidential election into a referendum on whether or not the federal government should be allowed to exist at all. I am not going to put on the ring. I'm going to throw it directly into the fire. And the way we do that with this platform is I resign on day one. I like to say I'm going to sign one document. It might be 2 or 3, but we're going to pardon everybody who's in jail for victimless crimes. So that might be a separate document, the pardons.
Yeah.
But then it's one executive order. It's all on day one. We declare the federal government of no authority. It's bankrupt, and I resign from the presidency to become the custodian of the federal government as a bankruptcy agent of the institution.
All right, bankruptcy agent is maybe.
I'm running for bankruptcy agent of the United States federal government, and if it's an office that you're going to say, well, you can't run for that, it doesn't exist yet. Watch me. We're going to make it happen. We're going to make the office exist because we've come to this point where libertarianism it always seems like an idea that's a little bit ahead of its time. Mm-hmm. And what I'm talking about is, to me at least, the evolution of libertarianism from going from it's this pure individualist philosophy to it's this set of political positions to it's government should this, that, the other, to no, it's really this pure message of love and respect for our fellow human beings. And it's never about telling other people what to do, but at the same time we can take leadership and say, look, if we localize government down to the community level, everybody gets what they want out of it. You, as a free, beautiful, independent human being, should have the right to decide what kind of government you're going to live under, or if you choose, none at all.
That's what I really love about your message is that I'm a minarchist, and I actually don't like using terms or words to really identify. I'm against identity politics, but it is an easy one word to explain that I do want just minimal government. So I actually wanted you to just kind of elaborate a little bit as to, let's say you are elected, we basically abolish the federal government. What's left over of the federal government look like to help organize all of the either states or municipalities? Or what does the new government kind of look like?
I gotta hand it to you because you're going straight into the nuts and bolts, which is what I want to geek out on. Nobody ever asked me about this stuff. They're just like, yeah, okay, you dissolve the federal government. But I'm glad that people ask. But before I get to answering that, I want to say about identifying as a minarchist. And I'm really tempted. Let me argue with you. Let me rail against your exact philosophical distinctions and tell you how you're wrong about everything. And that's what's killing our movement.
Right. I want to unite all of this. I'm not against anarchists, but I think there's some things that we need some form
it doesn't matter. It
protectionism.
doesn't matter. It's like even if the question I want to ask you is, are you a voluntarist?
Oh, yeah.
Are you a libertarian? Yeah. Are you a person of ethics? I almost resent that we even have to use the word libertarian. I mean, it's bad enough that Murray Rothbard, who came up with this as a cohesive philosophy, really, the kind of godfather intellectually of this movement, took the 2 worst possible terms to describe what he was talking about, anarchy and capitalism, and put them together into one word guaranteed to offend everybody. But as even the term minarchism was coined as a diminutive term to say they're wrong for advocating unprincipled government. But that's the beauty about this strategy is you get more principled, you get more philosophically pure, and you come out the other side and go, wow, I'm more pragmatic and more uniting also. And that's this really cool, just the power of this conceptual. I want people to really understand that's the premise of this, is fundamentally altering not just how we talk about libertarianism, but how we understand it and how that influences the policy that we put forth based on that. So you can have as much government as you want, as long as it's voluntary. And if we agree that we're not going to force on each other, that's the important thing. So now, to the nuts and bolts, how do we get there? Because this is really important for me as the person who's trying to sell this to the American people, going like, hey, no, this is practical, and not just practical, but it's easier to get rid of this thing than to keep it going. And every time I get asked a question, someone goes, well, what about this? And they think they're going to stump me, and it's like, no, it's not that complicated.
Right.
It's really pretty easy. Every agency of the federal government either gets dissolved, it gets spun off as a public trust or a private entity, or it gets localized to the states. So it's really
all of which will do it better, right?
Well,
almost always.
Almost always. Generally speaking, the more local government is, the more in line with its people's needs, the less corrupt it is, obviously. So take like the IRS. Now, some people are really disappointed with my plan for the IRS because they want to line everybody up and cut all their right hands off because taxation is theft. But we're not going to be vindictive, and that's a big part of this, again, in the approach that you have to bring to this. If you want to make this progress, libertarians have this ideal of justice. You own yourself, you have legitimately acquired property. If it's stolen from you, you should get it back. Fact is, and I would say this to a lot of liberals too, looking at this, and I mean even conservatives who have their ideas about justice. If you really want to achieve a world of freedom, where individual rights are respected, where we don't have this institutionalized theft, at some point we have to say, we're just not going to be materialistic and accept that there's never going to be perfect justice. We're not going to, like in the Marine Corps, they used to say, there's only one thief in the Marines, everybody else is just trying to get their shit back. If you take that hardline stance, we're going to have perfect justice, you're never going to get it. You're always going to be fighting over stuff. If you want to stop fighting and you want to stop fighting over stuff, you just have to accept it's not going to be perfect. But what we are offering with this is something way better than what we have and what we have to look forward to if we keep what we have going. Right now, the system that we live under with the federal government is committing intergenerational child abuse in the name of government debt. Because when I tell you you're born into America and you owe this share of the federal debt, you never had a say in it. We are forcing our children to pay for stuff that they never had a say in. As if it wasn't bad enough that we were forcing people to pay for stuff, we're now so irresponsible about that through government that we force it on future generations. And the best part about this, as I see it, is the dissolving of, there's so many. Really the best part and the most popular platform plank of all in this is no more daylight saving time. That goes with I'll give a speech and go through like all the benefits, like we're going to get rid of the IRS and the CIA and the FBI and no more federal taxes and regulations, blah, 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 no more Obamacare. Oh yeah, no more daylight saving time. Crowd goes wild. That's all they care about, But no more daylight saving time. So no, we get to disown the debt.
Yeah,
the federal debt, it's illegitimate. Any free market analysis, it's like the social contract bullshit line. Sorry, I didn't sign it. You can't force it on me. The American people didn't sign up for debt to foreign banks, foreign governments, foreign corporations. It's all illegitimate. We get to write it off. And then me as the bankruptcy agent, I have a fiduciary responsibility to repay the true creditors. That's the American people. So how do we do that? And it's not going to be perfect. Again, I'm not going to be able to say, well, you paid this much in taxes, so bring me your receipts. And no, we're not going to try to untie that knot. But we are going to liquidate all of the assets of the federal government that we can that don't serve a legitimate purpose at the state level, and those will go into fund Social Security as a spun-off institution. We would say privatized as hardcore free marketeers, but it's really more accurate to say that it's a public trust, and that anybody who's paid into the system or anybody who's over 18 at this point, it gets whatever their share is, how we're able to pay that out on that system is. Then the VA, right? Most Americans support veterans being taken care of. And even as a libertarian, I don't have a problem with Americans coming together to take care of veterans. I have a problem with it being done by taxation. I have a problem with us stealing from people to take care of veterans. So we spin the VA off, again, as a private entity, or you could call it a public trust. Every veteran in America gets one ownership voting share on a blockchain. You give the VA to veterans. Of course, we get to end the drug war, so the war on drugs. So those of us on drugs, we get to declare victory. The people on drugs have won the war on drugs. But no, I mean, very seriously, the war on drugs it's a crime, and that crime ends.
Sad.
And we have 20 veterans committing suicide a day in this country. I guarantee you end the drug war, you give us freedom to medicate how we see fit, and I can tell you, cannabis saved my life when I got back from Iraq, and countless others. But MDMA, psilocybin, all the other potential treatments for MDMA that are for PTSD that are kept illegal because of government, you give veterans that freedom, you put the VA in their hands. If we can give it a small endowment as we spin it off, great. I don't think most Americans are going to object to that. I guarantee you're not going to have 20 veteran suicides a day when that happens. Then you have like Department of Transportation. Every state already has a Department of Transportation. Not that complicated. You sign over the assets. Now you have 50 independent state departments of transportation doing a better job of allocating resources to meet people's needs in those states. I'm from New Mexico, and in New Mexico, the state legislator is notoriously corrupt. for just putting freeway interchanges near property owned by state legislators who benefit from the property value increase. So at least that corruption is going to be that much more manageable at the state level without the federal corruption. Then you get to the big things like the military, and this is
That's a big one that I
this
wanna
is
hear
yeah,
about.
and I'm really encouraged by your position as a minarchist who goes, yeah, the founders were right, and Adam's right about this, because I talk about there's this 30% of the electorate, the hardcore Republicans and Democrats who vote consistently, like if they don't, the country's going to hell. They're the only ones we're really up against, and those are the hardcore militarists. The rest of the population knows that the military, at least as we have it today, is making us less safe. They know inherently, I mean, anybody who's paying attention to human history knows we're living in the most peaceful times in human history right now. We don't need not just the military like this. In this day and age, in the age of the internet, of accountability, we don't need a military, period. And the fact is, we never did. Freedom was always the answer. The founders of this country were right when they said we should have a militia defense, not a military, because militaries defend governments, militias defend free people. And if you turn it over to the market, which is what the militia is, right? It's a market-based thing, people coming together voluntarily to provide defense services. By the way, we didn't win the Revolutionary War with armies of America's best and brightest lined up in silly costumes, making it really easy to kill each other. No, we said, come on in and we're going to shoot you in the back of the head with a militia defense. That's more effective, that's more efficient. Reality, though, is in the world that we live in today, you can see the establishment, the military-industrial complex of the United States has been trying to get a war with Iran going for decades. And they haven't been able to. Why? Because we live in the age of the internet. You can't lie to people in the United States and say, everybody in Iran hates you because you're free and they want to kill you. Like, you can get on the internet, you can get on Skype and talk to someone in Iran right now and go, sorry, that's another government lie. So,
They might try a false flag attack, which they've done many times in the past. But
so I'll just say one more thing about the mechanics of this, because there is one thing that is really exciting about this. We get to release all the records. There's one caveat that is we can't release personal data that the federal government shouldn't have, but everything else, maybe we use the Library of Congress as the clearinghouse, so we shut down what agency by agency, all the records go to one place, and if they don't have personal information, revealed on the internet. So no more secrets, no more lies. We're going to finally find out how many aliens are at Area 51,
if any,
and which ones of the crab people killed the Kennedys. We need to know for sure, and whether. Well, most importantly, we are going to find out once and for all whether the Earth is round or flat. And I know the government knows. We're going to find out, and we're not going to let them. I don't know, but there are obviously. I'm joking about the ridiculous conspiracies, but there are a lot of ridiculously evil conspiracies that we're going to stop by doing this, and a lot of important lessons we're going to learn by getting all that data out.
Wow, that is fantastic, and that answers a lot of questions.
I could keep going. That was my short answer. That was my short version of like every step. I'm like, no, because and this is the thing, is like I'm excited about this. I've been asked all these challenging questions, and I've thought out each one in policy terms, and it's not one of those things. A lot of people you propose this idea to, even volunteers, they go, just all the federal government, press the red button. I don't know. But the things when you actually go through and you figure this out, you go, wow, this government has done so much evil, and it is stolen from us. That not only is getting rid of it, like the relief of so much evil, but out of every single step in the process of getting rid of this central authority, of localizing power, of seeking justice, of releasing prisoners, of returning stolen funds, of de-weaponizing weapons that never should have existed in the first place. You go, wow, every bit of this is awesome, and like I get to do this. Like no one else is that I know of has said, all right, well, this is the objective. Let's figure this out as a matter of policy, as a platform. I'm really looking forward to taking what I've got now is 5 paragraphs on my website and all this stuff in my head and turning it into a 100-page book and really laying it out. But I'm glad that you're giving me the platform to get into stuff that I like.
Hey, I'm glad you're giving me the time, honestly. It's really great to hear someone that's running for president and he's actually got a lot of the same ideologies that we have as minarchists. It's most of my people, I think, but all of us are libertarians, and we're all united.
Exactly. You just stop identifying as that.
Yeah, like I said in the beginning, my caveat was I don't like using words to divide people because I'm against identity politics.
I don't even like that we have to use the word libertarian. Like I was trying to say about anarcho-capitalists, like a libertarian is someone who believes in freedom. Freedom is what you have when no one is forcing their will on you in any way. So if you don't believe in freedom, you're someone who believes that it's okay under certain circumstances to force your will on someone else. So why do we need the word libertarian to describe good people, ethical people,
I'm a good person.
respectful, caring, loving people? Like we need a word for, okay, libertarian, that's what it means then, fine.
There we go. Okay, well, before we get into weeds of anything else, here's the other open-ended question, which might lead to another long answer because it'll probably need one. But it's really interesting, I think. But what could we have as either a local or federal government to help stop any kind of monopoly from a tech conglomerate or like the pharmaceutical industry, extremely corrupt? How do we stop an industry or a company with an AI or robots that can, fire tens of thousands of people and basically just ruin people's lives overnight? Is there any way maybe you'd keep a judicial branch or something to keep some kind of protectionism for human life and the quality of life for people?
Can we get 30 minutes on the clock, please? Okay. No, I can actually, the answer to that question is really surprisingly easy and simple.
That's exciting.
And it's get rid of the intellectual property racket. There's real property and there's the myth of intellectual property. Now, I have no problem with you and I are writing a book together, and we have a contractual agreement to describe how we're going to handle the text. And we call what we are creating intellectual property as a metaphor in this contract to dictate how you and I are going to deal with the data itself, this real physical property, right? That's fine. Intellectual property in that realm is okay. But when I say, no, I wrote this book, and therefore I'm going to put a gun to your head through the government if you're going to use my ideas, that's wrong. Intellectual property as a government policy flies in the face of real property. You cannot have true respect for real property that is your self-ownership and intellectual property in the same legal space and have justice. So all of these tech companies depend on the government intellectual property racket in order to maintain their power. Mm-hmm. Like you look at Google. If you didn't have intellectual property, anybody could have just ripped off the Google algorithm, all the software, and said, well, we're going to distribute it for free.
Right.
No, or, well, we're like, Google makes money selling ads and paying, charging people for hosted services.
AdWords, yeah.
I do as little business as I can with them, but I still,
kind of have to.
It's really hard to avoid.
Yeah.
And what they're able to do is they're saying, because we own this intellectual property, and government is going to allow us to sequester it and prevent other people from using it, then we're the only ones who are able to have the physical property of the servers and the databases and the personnel, the physical facilities required to maintain this. And so we're going to jack up those prices. Mm-hmm. Not only that, we're going to have this huge first-to-market monopoly, corporatist, government-granted through intellectual property advantage that we're going to be able to become a conglomerate. We're going to be able to buy up the competition in other companies. If you didn't have that intellectual property in the first place, someone would come along and say, well, we can do what Google's doing, but we have cheaper server space. So we're going to outcompete them on that. When it comes to developing new products, it's the same thing. If I invent a new kind of watch, and I say, well, I invented this watch, so you have to license it for me if you want to build it. If instead we live in a world without intellectual property, I put that design out on the internet. Whoever's most efficient gets to make it. So the focus goes from being on the last idea to the next idea. If I want to be rewarded as an inventor, now I have to be promising to make the next thing. So getting rid of intellectual property as a racket solves so many of these problems, but especially the problems that you raise with tech conglomerates. You take away the extra power that they have with corporatism, right, especially, but intellectual property as the underlying basis for that. And now everything is open source. When you can 3D print something at home, all of their power goes away. When we have MeshNet for internet, and you're not relying on central servers at all their power goes away. You don't need them. Mm-hmm. So then you in your question, you took it to some authority to defend human life. You're not going to need it because you're going to have natural law as the culture throughout society. You're going to have all the things that ANCAP philosophers come up with for dispute resolution organizations or insurance or accountability, reputation systems on the internet. But even more importantly than that, getting past the status paradigm means that the violence that is even a potential problem here becomes insignificant. 90+% of the violence done in the world today is done in the name of government. And if you look at the remaining 10% or so, 90% of that is directly caused by government. War on drugs, war on poverty.
Yep.
So you get rid of government, you've just gotten rid of 99% of the violence in the world today. And you're going, well, I don't know. What do we do about the other 1%? It's almost insignificant. Like we have these all the resources that are going to deal with the other 99%. Now it goes to that 1%. But even there's a bigger fear, if I may be presuming correctly behind your question, that the rich assholes who run the world today, generally using government, are going to be able to do so with technology even without government, right?
That's basically the core question, yeah.
Well, this gets me to the psychology level. And my undergrad degree is in psychology, so I'm good at pretending like I know what I'm talking about on this count. We are getting so much more mentally healthy over time. We are getting the time to engage in therapy, in counseling, in awareness, in research on the internet. How many people are able to find support groups that didn't exist before the internet as a result of that? You look at like the Rockefellers, the Warbucks, the whatever, these great family dynasties who control, the 1% of the 1% of the 1% who control, 90% of the wealth on the planet, however, whatever it is. They used to be able to pass on their fears, their insecurities, their violent tendencies, their evil to generation after generation after generation, kind of sequestered from the rest of the world. Now, those assholes have to raise their kids right in front of the same internet as the rest of us.
Transparency.
The psychological roots of all the greatest evil in the world are even going to be addressed and ultimately resolved, not just by getting rid of government, but really by this technological enlightenment, this surge of productivity and capability that humanity is experiencing right now. So ultimately, you say, hey, we're going to have this world with AI and robots and fire temp. No. Like, we're dealing with glitches right now on our way to this phase of technological enlightenment. But that's why I'm not worried about that. And even if I'm wrong, there's an immediate threat that needs to be dealt with first.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad to hear the optimism in everything you've said. There's actually a good reason to be optimistic about the collapse of the federal government, which might happen, probably will happen in our lives.
Well, I'm saying, hey, we can do this the easy way, because the hard way is let it collapse.
Yeah.
This is applying a solution as big as the problem.
An easy way to slide into a new world of freedom rather than see the dollar collapse and maybe anarchy take over the wrong way. Who knows? Honestly, we can't even predict that, so we don't have to get into those weeds. But thank you so much for your time. It's been really exciting hearing your philosophy.
Thanks, Brian.
And I wish you all the best.
Appreciate the opportunity. Support independent media. This is part of living the change. Make it happen. The technology is nothing without deliberate, conscientious use. If you like this platform, if you like what Brian's doing, support his production, please.
Thank you so much. And support Adam. Where can they find more about you and how can they support you? TheFreedomLine.com. 3 words, TheFreedomLine.com. You get my book there for free. Without having to remember how to spell my funny last name, you can find my campaign website and all my media stuff. So, TheFreedomLine.com. All right. Take care.
Thanks.